This YouTuber was essentially threatened with prison time over this whole Lego saga that's been going on out west, because things have gotten just so much worse in the Bricks and Minifigs situation after Reckless Ben was finally able to post part 3 of his story. So the last time I covered the situation, Reckless Ben allegedly fled to Mexico to avoid arrest warrants in a battle with a Lego reselling company. The cops in Utah had just become villains of the YouTube investigation, and an 83-year-old man's Star Wars collection was still missing. Well, the saga continues because on July 8th, part 3 dropped, and it turns out the reason it took so long for this to finally be released was because of the legal red tape. According to Ben, he was genuinely just trying to stay out of prison.
I'm about to go to court, and I don't even know what I did wrong. Yeah, Bricks and Minifigs is making up tons of lies about me to the police to try to get me thrown in jail so I can't release my documentary about them. But the crazy part is I'm not even allowed to know what they're saying I did.
Okay, so part 3 is definitely the biggest chunk of new information that we've got since this whole story came out. But some of it only makes sense if you know what happened between my last video and what we're recording right now. So let's pick up from where we left off. So first, a lot of you guys said that I missed an important part in my last video, and that was the whole U-Haul situation. So to understand the whole U-Haul thing, we kind of need to go back to November 14th, 2024, the night that Bricks and Minifigs Corporate took over the Kaiser, Oregon store from the Gormans and handed the keys to Brandon Best and Joshua Johnson. So Crystal Gorman says that when Brandon showed up that night, she noticed a large U-Haul truck in the parking lot. Bam Corporate's version told CoffeeZilla that Brandon arrived in a rental car, not a U-Haul. And any U-Haul involvement was a complete, separate, unrelated event.
When Brandon came to the store that night, he was driving a U-Haul truck.
Now, in typical fashion, this was immediately disputed.
Brandon showed up to the Salem store in a rental car. When he came to get the keys from Crystal, he was there in a rental car, not in a U-Haul.
It wasn't until after he told me he was taking the keys and locking me out that I really kind of paid attention to the fact that he had a large, not the small, the large U-Haul truck.
Then a former employee from the Eugene, Oregon Bricks and Minifigs store, the location that Brandon and Josh were already running, told CoffeeZilla something that caught a lot of people's attention. They said on the night of the Salem takeover, Brandon showed up to their store with a medium-sized U-Haul truck full of Star Wars and other Lego sets, and that Brandon's explanation to the staff was that Crystal had stolen them and bolted.
I'm a former employee, started in 2024, and I was working under the old manager, Brian, and he sold the store to Brandon Best and Josh.
What store was this? Bricks and Minifigs where?
Eugene.
Okay, now what did you see that made you want to talk to me?
I saw Reckless Ben's YouTube video about the Salem store closing down, because when I was talking to my co-workers about the situation about Salem, and what we were told through other employees that it was just a bad area to work in. It was like haunted, if you will, is what was going around. But after seeing the video of Reckless Ben, he exposed them, and it makes a lot more sense with what we dealt with Brandon and Josh. Like, oh, Crystal stole Lego sets and bolted out of the country.
Who says that?
Brandon Best told us.
Now, BAM Corporate said that story was being mixed up with a completely separate event. So their explanation was that on October 24th, about 3 weeks before the takeover, Brandon picked up inventory from a different former franchisee in a U-Haul and brought it to Eugene. Then on November 14th, there was a second U-Haul, but that one was for hauling a camper trailer to a spot in Salem where Brandon planned to stay, not for Legos. And the documentation Brandon provided to CoffeeZilla lined up with the parts of that story. A U-Haul contract dated November 14th, a final photo taken inside of the Salem store at 9:44 p.m., and a mileage photo from when he returned the truck at 12:41 a.m. on November 15th. So that leaves us with about a 3-hour gap. And when CoffeeZilla asked the former employee about that, they said it took 4 hours to unload the camper, which CoffeeZilla pointed out, hey, if it took 4 hours to unload, he physically could not also drive to another city, load a bunch of Lego, unload them, and still return the truck at 12:41 a.m. Like, the math just doesn't make sense. So the reason I didn't include that situation in the first video I covered was that CoffeeZilla left it there. It was weird, it was unresolved, but the timeline doesn't really support the whole he moved the Lego to Eugene that night theory. At least not with the evidence that was available during that time. I just wanted to wait for more information before I talked about it. But then Reddit and Twitter got involved. So using the contract number from CoffeeZilla's video, people on social media pulled up the actual U-Haul return receipt, which showed a return time of 6:12 in the morning. Not 12:41 in the morning. And I guess the reason the 12:41 a.m. photo doesn't automatically settle this is U-Haul charges a convenience fee if an attendant has to process the return for you. But if you skip that fee and do self-return through the app logs the return time automatically. And according to people who went very deep into this, it essentially is impossible to have a 6:12 a.m. return time in the system without that self-return process running, because the app is what records the timestamp. So essentially the argument that's being made is Brandon took the photo of the mileage at 12:41 in the morning, but the truck wasn't actually returned until 6:12 in the morning, which would mean that he would have roughly 6 more hours than what was presented to CoffeeZilla. And separately, someone pointed out that it's against U-Haul's own policy to tow an RV with a box truck because most camper trailers don't have their own brakes, which is clearly a safety issue. So there was even a problem with the original story for why the U-Haul was there. Now, I do have to make a disclaimer though. None of this has been officially confirmed. The receipt hasn't been externally verified, and the U-Haul policy angle is based on a specific trailer involved. And at this point, we still don't have all of the pieces. But it's worth knowing that this aspect of the story exists because a lot of people believe this is the moment where the whole thing started. And it's the reason that the U-Haul question keeps coming up every time someone tries to figure out where the Legos actually went. Okay, so moving on, CoffeeZilla's full investigation dropped on June 10th, and that clarified a whole lot. The first thing he cleared up was the number everyone had been repeating since day one. The collection was never worth $200,000. The actual internal store spreadsheet, created using a Bricks and Minifigs Salem email address, and I guess sitting on BAM's own servers the entire time, put the collection's real value somewhere between $85,000 and $120,000. The $200,000 figure came from a press release that went out before anyone had gone through the full inventory. The Gormans admitted it, while BAM had even used it themselves. But after going through over 200 photos Crystal took the night of the takeover and having people manually tag all the Star Wars sets, CoffeeZilla found evidence of about $21,000 in Mansell inventory that can be confirmed in the store that night. And then on top of that, some of the remaining Legos were explained by a private side deal Brian had made with another Lego YouTuber, selling, I guess, sets that were still marked as in storage on the BAM spreadsheet. So then you had the point of sale data from the store's own system showing about $51,000 in Star Wars collection sales, matching the Mansell collection, which compares to the $24,000 that Crystal's own spreadsheet had recorded. So there's definitely a gap there. And that could be partially explained by layaway items that got marked in one system but not updated on another. But putting it all together, CoffeeZilla estimates that only about $10,000 to $20,000 of the collection is genuinely unaccounted for. But Brian is still likely owed somewhere between $50,000 and $83,000 for sets that were sold and were never properly paid out to him. So essentially, we're looking at both missing inventory and unpaid money, which are two different problems, but both are extremely real and important. And then we have BAM's CEO, Ammon McNeff, acting like this was the first time he ever saw the spreadsheet of Mansell's inventory. The same spreadsheet that had been created using the Bricks and Minifigs Salem email address and stored on BAM's own servers the whole time.
A spread, like I understand, a spreadsheet and a contract are a good start. Yeah. Yeah, but we never got that. That was never sent to us at corporate, by the way.
It says it's. I'm so confused. It says I'm on the file right now. It says storage used, owned by BAM Franchising Inc. Owner Salem.or bricksandminifigs.com.
What are you looking at?
It says owner Salem.or at bricksandminifigs.com. That's you guys.
So this would have been created under so we have the
y'all definitely have this. Y'all have access to this.
Well, I had no idea.
And after all that came out, BAM put out a statement saying they had worked diligently to resolve Mansell's collection issues, and that it was all an isolated and unfortunate incident related to a single former franchisee. And they also directly denied that they had ever made any legal attempt to seize the GoFundMe that Reckless Ben had set up for the Mansell family. The problem with that denial is, though, that people almost immediately pulled up the actual lawsuit filing and found this. Because right there under the complaint, under the section listing what the plaintiffs are asking for, it specifically names, quote, GoFundMe and other crowdfunding proceeds as a part of damages that BAM was seeking. Uh-oh. Yeah, so it's safe to say that response made things a whole lot worse. And then there's the consignment argument. So BAM has been insisting since day one that consignment was never an authorized activity for their franchisees, and that the Gorman's deal with Brian Mansa was completely unauthorized under corporate policy. But then people started pulling out the actual franchisee agreement, the one that Anna McNeff signed, and they found that it specifically says franchisees may also offer consignment services. Uh-oh. Again. But then on top of that, BAM's own Facebook post from November 2023 advertised Ed Mansell's collection publicly, describing it as one of the most valuable privately held Star Wars Lego collections in the region. They straight up used it as a marketing tool, so like the whole argument that the corporation was just unaware of this just doesn't make sense whatsoever. And then you have part 3 that goes back and shows the full version of this argument playing out in person, because Ben included footage of his very first visit to Ammon at the corporate headquarters before any of this became a documentary at all. By his framing, he went there in good faith, wanting to give BAM a chance to just return the sets before making anything public. And Ammon's response on camera was to just flatly deny ever hearing about Brian Mansell or any Lego collection at that store. And then that story only shifted once Ben pulled up BAM's own social media post advertising the exact collection.
So what's going on?
So you guys are holding some of our Legos?
No, we're not.
You're not?
No. So who's
Brian Mansell.
Okay, and who is that?
He's a guy who had he had like $200,000 worth of Legos in your guys' store.
Nope. Never happened.
Eamon was first trying to claim that he's never even heard of Brian Mansell, and this guy definitely never had any Legos in a bricks and minifigs store. But once we showed him all of the social media posts his own company made, it was very obvious that we just caught him in a lie. So the CEO decided to change his story, and now the story is the Legos used to be in the store, but the previous owner, Crystal, she stole the Legos right before they took over the store.
We don't have the Lego. Crystal sold the Lego.
And I mean, at that point, the story became, okay, it existed, but the previous owner, Crystal, sold it on her way out. And now we know it seems like that's not true. So after CoffeeZilla's video dropped, Benjamin Gorman put out his own response, and he added a piece that hadn't really been talked about before. He says that when BAM Corporate took over the Salem branch that November night, they promised the Gormans a full itemized inventory of everything in the store. But apparently that itemized inventory list, that never showed up. And here's why that matters, because under the franchisee agreement, if the Gormans had received that inventory list, they would have had the right to trigger a clause allowing a neutral third-party evaluator to come in and independently assess the store's assets. So without that inventory list, that clause could never really be invoked, which means they had no way to formally challenge the valuation that BAM put on these assets they were walking away from.
The franchise agreement gives us the opportunity to challenge that inventory by demanding a third-party evaluator of everything in the store. Of course we wouldn't have accepted their inventory if Brandon was claiming the Mansell sets weren't there. And then they would have had to provide a third-party inventory, which would have either revealed everything inside the store or would have immediately conflicted with the photo evidence. So everything about the missing sets could have come to light at the time if BAM had simply followed their own franchise agreement.
But I guess instead of sending an impartial corporate representative to assess the store, BAM apparently tasked Brandon Best, the guy who was there because, you know, he was going to become the new franchisee owner. He was the one who was evaluating the inventory. That sounds like a conflict of interest to me. You know, since Brandon has every financial reason to value things as low as possible going into the deal because, you know, he's the one buying those assets. That's like showing up to a used car lot and you put the price on the car that you're gonna buy. You're like, yeah, I think that's worth 12 grand. I'll pay 12 grand. And they're like, okay, fine. How about it? No third person was involved to, I don't know, check what the market rate for everything was. But Crystal also said in the podcast appearance that she and Benjamin signed nothing transferring ownership of the store or terminating their agreement that BAM had never properly transferred the store lease to them in the first place. And then later used the same issue as justification for taking it back.
I would have to imagine that the seller would be the crucial party to sign that.
Yeah,
So
and we didn't sign anything.
Okay,
Nothing.
nope.
We didn't sign their termination letter. We didn't sign anything. In the franchise agreement, there is stuff in there that if you are purchasing a pre-existing location, it is corporate's responsibility to get a hold of the landlord and have the lease transferred over to you. Ben and I signed paperwork within that franchise agreement that they were then supposed to send to the landlord, that they never sent to the landlord. Landlord. That night where they showed up, Kai McAllister in that phone call says, well, we technically still own the lease on the building, so you have no rights to remain there.
Dirty.
And that's kind of one of the bases of our lawsuit is you created the problems that you then used as a way to terminate our agreement.
Then she mentioned something else that got a lot of people's attention. She said that she spoke to 4 other former franchise owners who described going through similar experiences when they tried to exit the company. So as it turns out, Crystal really wasn't the only one with a story like this. Not even close. So a former Bricks and Minifigs franchise owner that goes by The Last Relic online came forward with an account of what happened to a Florida store. He bought an existing BAM location, put serious work into it, his mom painted the store, his dad built the tables, and when he hit financial trouble after, I guess, back-to-back hurricanes, he went to corporate and asked for if he could bring on an investor. But they said no. So he then tried another option, sell the store back to corporate, stay on as a manager and buy it back within 6 months once things stabilized. But corporate, I guess, agreed to this, and they sent in Brandon Best and Joshua Johnson to assess and take over.
After the hurricanes and everything, I'm like, well, the situation it ain't good. Like, I'm actually really worried about paying rent, and I would like to bring on an investor, and they still said no. I'm like, well, here's my other proposition. You guys are personal guarantors. If I can sell you back the store, I stay on as a manager, then in 6 months from now, I don't care what the price is. I'll buy it for more than it's worth right now. Like, it's no problem. And they're like, all right, well, we have these 2 guys named Josh and Brandon. And they labeled them as like store rescuers.
And after the inventory was done and the handover was agreed to, he says that he was suddenly hit with a letter from BAM's lawyers saying that his contract was being terminated with $70,000 in fines tacked on, which he says happened to roughly equal the value of his entire store inventory. Meaning, instead of walking away with anything, he walked away with nothing.
I'm like, all right, I'm waiting a few days. And then I'm like, hey, man, I'm kind of feel like I'm being jerked around. Like, what's the sale? Like, what's the inventory count? He's like, oh, it matches your inventory completely. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. I'll get like possibly 120,000 out of it. I wasn't expecting much. I'm like, I'm not selling you the furniture or any of that stuff, the goodwill parts of things. So then I get this letter from their lawyers. That's like, we're terminating your contract, putting $70,000 in fines on you and all this stuff. And it apparently equaled out to my inventory count. And they just said, like, you violated paying rent, which I never did. Like, I always paid rent on time. You violated paying royalties. I'm like, your accountants agreed on that. And you guys, the owners, agreed on it.
And one morning in May, he got a call at 7 a.m. from the store manager saying that 3 guys from corporate had flown in overnight and they were loading everything into a U-Haul and shutting the place down with no warning, no time for employees to look for new jobs. And then a month later, he started receiving calls from the landlord because BAM had never taken his name off the lease during the 7 months that they ran the store. And the day, I guess, they closed, it happened to be the day after their names and personal guarantors came off the lease. So then he was allegedly left holding $500,000 of debt on a store that he hadn't owned in months.
Trust me, Bricks and Minifigs, in my opinion, is freaking thieves in the night. Literally in the night. They literally flew over at night and closed down my location. And so then they left the lease with me. The property manager was like, hey, you owe us like $500,000 because you still have this many years left.
What?
Yeah. And I'm like, what the freak are you guys talking about?
I mean, that just sounds bizarre. But apparently he eventually got out of it, not because of any legal win, but because the landlord remembered him as a good tenant who always paid on time and cleaned up everything himself. So I guess thankfully he had that going for him. But apparently there's even more stories like this because you have a former California franchisee who tried to exit the BAM system when their contract ended to rebrand into their own store independently. They ended up getting sued by BAM and won. So according to the franchise owners themselves, 2 of the California stores are still running today under different names. So BAM lost that case, but they do apparently have a history with this. So now documents that surfaced during the controversy raised a whole bunch of questions about Josh Johnson's actual role in all this. Because according to franchise records, Joshua was never formally listed as a franchise owner of Bricks and Minifigs. Only Brandon Best's name appeared on the Oregon franchisee listings. So Joshua's role seemed to be on the corporate side. But then in the leaked body cam footage from Ben's arrest in Utah, Josh is on camera telling the police that he's the owner alongside of Brandon Best. Ben and his crew really just showed up here like Scooby-Doo and his crew because they would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for these meddling kids. But I guess separately, when BAM announced they were parting ways with both Josh and Brandon on June 4th, Brandon Best still owned the Bricks and Minifigs store in Eugene, Oregon. The same Eugene store that the U-Haul was allegedly driven to. But I also feel like I want to mention that BAM was also kind of like disorganized when it comes to its own documents. So I don't know if that has anything to do with this as well. So whether parting ways means something different than what it sounds, or whether the June 4th announcement was specifically about the Salem agreement, that's kind of unclear, but they're apparently still in the system. So now, in part 3 of his series, Ben frames his approach as trying to do things the right way at first, going to BAM directly and giving them a chance to just hand back the sets before he made any of these videos public. But according to him, Ammon's response wasn't to work anything out. No, he just called the police. So from there, Ben says that BAM spent the following months trying to build a case to get him arrested before he could finish and release the documentary. That's when a search warrant was then issued naming the missing Legos and resulted in Ben and the people around him being taken in. And after he got out, Ben says a warrant was issued for his arrest on a separate, not specified charge, and that the police showed up at his home in Los Angeles looking for him without bail being an option. But since he was out of state at the time, nothing came from this particular visit. All of this just sounds so crazy to me. Does it really work like this? I mean, if so, we have some very clear flaws in our system. But once things escalate into actual charges, it's split into 2 separate cases. One in American Fork, and the second one, which is the more serious one, in Provo, where BAM's corporate office is based. In the American Fork case, Ben says a protective order was put in place that kept the specifics of what he's accused for sealed from him, including redacted body cam footage, and a prosecutor pushed back on him representing himself, reading that if he obtained the details through discovery, he could use them for content on his channel. Regardless, I think it's a terrible idea if he chooses to represent himself. Hopefully, he is not representing himself. But apparently the Provo case is the one with real teeth. Ben says that BAM accused him of extortion, claiming that he'd threatened to burn the store down and hurt people if the Lego sets weren't returned, which is apparently the accusation that triggered the search and arrest warrant.
Hi there, I'm calling to report a crime. They themselves say, hey, you guys stole this product from this person. If you don't give it back, I'm going to burn the place down. Or we're going to burn the place down. Or I'll kill you. It's Ben Snyder who's been the one engaged in this behavior.
You can see in the police report that the crime he wanted to get us charged for is called extortion, which basically means we're threatening him into paying us, which is very illegal.
And I guess his response to this was try what he calls an Uno reverse card, going to the exact same police department and accuse Ammon of obstruction on the basis of Ammon lying to him about the collection ever being in the store. And from there, he faced a pretty frustrating runaround. An officer he says was assigned to look into his complaint became unreachable. Calls went unanswered for weeks, and when he showed up in person at the Provo police station, he says he was told the case status just couldn't be shared with him over the phone or in person. And then he eventually found out by mail that the police had moved forward with Ammon's case, not his.
Are you able to look and see how the case is going? All I really want is kind of just an update on the case.
That's not something that I can tell you over the phone.
Okay, you can't even just tell me like how it's going, like if he's still looking into it, or?
No, I can't. That's not something I can do.
Okay, well, thank you.
But eventually, I did find an answer. They sent it to me in the mail, and looks like I was right. The police only had time to take on one of our cases, and it was Ammon's, not mine. Yes, the case that had an overwhelming amount of evidence. They thought that case was garbage, and they took on the case that has zero evidence at all.
Then you have police body cam audio in part 3 where officers appeared to tell Ammon that the extortion accusations itself didn't hold up under Utah law, but that a different charge, aggravated commercial obstruction, might apply instead. And that's based on the claim that Ben and his group refused to leave BAM's offices when asked to.
In the police body cam footage, after the police watched my full conversation, proving that I didn't threaten to burn the place down or literally anything, they even admitted to Ammon that there was no credibility with his entire case against me.
We agreed that there really was no extortion code that would fit your situation. However, you know, at the end of the day, we do want to help you guys so you're not having to deal with this fool and all of his issues. We did find that there was another code that fit, and it's called aggravated commercial obstruction.
Even though there's absolutely nothing to his claim against me, if they work together, maybe they can fabricate some type of charge against me.
However, the tricky thing is that we have to prove that this individual either entered or remains unlawfully on the premise. When he came to the property, did you have to ask him more than once to leave?
Yes.
Okay.
You know, we're not leaving until we get it. And he's like, no. Like,
And he disputes that account directly with his own footage of the visit, which allegedly shows the group leaving as soon as they were told to leave. And they only returned after Ammon asked them to bring proof of ownership for the collection.
But if we go back and look at the footage of what happened, this is the reality.
So when they say go to corporate, how do we respond next time? I have no idea. You have to take it up with them. It's your thing with them. That doesn't involve us. Okay. As a separate business entity, you got to take it up with them. You got to resolve it with them. Okay, well, thanks so much, guys. Yeah, sorry, guys. Good. Good. Thank you. Hey, you want to talk to them? They're on their way out. You want me to grab them or no?
I don't know. It kind of looks like the reality of what happened is we left too early for them. They wanted to pull us back in to keep talking to us.
Whatever the actual sequence was, the charge that came out of this was a second-degree felony carrying up to 15 years in prison. If asking for clarification of where a Lego set is results in you getting 15 years in prison, something is extremely wrong. But there's also a detail about Bam allegedly subpoenaing Google for records tied to an email address that Ben had used to contact them about an inventory list, pulling emails, search history, and footage tied to the account. I feel like I said this in my last video, but wouldn't it be just infinitely easier to just return the remaining Lego sets back to the Mansell family and pay them what they're owed? Because now, I mean, they're fighting 2 court cases and doing all of this. That has to be way more expensive than just returning the Mansells what they're owed. Yeah, this is just crazy.
I'm now starting to think that the only reason Ammon wanted us to email him about the inventory list wasn't actually to give us the inventory list, but actually it was a trap. Yeah, Ammon only wanted me to email him so he can find out my email and subpoena Google and find out all of my private information. And you think I'm lying, but they actually did this. They subpoenaed Google asking for all private information tied to this email address. And Google sent them like hundreds of hours of all the raw footage from everything I've filmed to the Lego video so far, all my emails, all my search history, all the metadata that shows everywhere I've been.
But part 3 also includes clips of Ammon saying that Bam repeatedly tried to offer the inventory back to Brian Mansell and that Brian turned it down, stacked against an email chain from Brian's attorney. Then you had a follow-up sent 16 days after silence, and the response they eventually got back stated that Brandon Best and Joshua Johnson had no legal obligation to return anything and considered the matter closed.
You've offered Brian the inventory of sets that was in the store.
Yeah, whatever was left over, we've offered that on multiple occasions. So we've tried to make multiple offers, and hopefully we'll be able to get them to the table so we can discuss it.
And this is pretty much Ammon's game plan now. Go on as many news stations as you can and lie.
The entire time we were saying, hey, we want to help, we want to help.
The main narrative now seems to be Bricks and Minifigs has always been trying to give Brian his Legos back, but Brian just never wanted them back.
Would you be willing to just take this?
I say let's take a look at what actually happened.
Read from the bottom up. That is our correspondence with Bricks and Minifigs, trying to work with them and getting the sets back.
So right when this happened, Brian hired an attorney to reach out to Bricks and Minifigs. They sent an email saying, how should we proceed to retake the possession of the sets/minifigures? And they actually emailed back saying they were willing to help. And then after this, they just never respond. So Brian's attorney sent them another email, just following up on this, when can we pick up the sets? And they still didn't respond. So the attorneys emailed back saying, it's now been 16 days. How can we get these Legos back? And finally, they received a response. It says Brandon Best and Joshua Johnson have no legal obligation to return any of the Lego product that exists in their store to you. What?
But I do want to make a disclaimer here. I mean, none of this is coming from a neutral third party. It's Ben's own documentary, filmed and edited by him and his team. So, I mean, just like everything else in this case, we kind of have to treat it as this is one side of the story, at least until the courts decide what happened here. But the video also confirmed what people started piecing together on the internet, that the McNeff's family's path to owning BAM wasn't clean, and there was a real battle over control with both companies, which are Bricks and Minifigs and Legally Mine. And this goes back to about 2019. So if you remember from my last video, I mentioned that Ammon and Mac McNeff, the current CEO and COO of Bricks and Minifigs, had previously sued their own father, Daniel McNeff, in a dispute over control of a separate company called Legally Mine, which Ammon and Matt had been running alongside of BAM. What's new is that Dan McNeff himself posted about it on Facebook of all places and confirmed directly that he had been the CEO of Bricks and Minifigs before his sons removed him from the position. And he called the removal illegal and said that he hadn't had anything to do with the company since. So getting that side of the story is just crazy. And the post also included that Dan had received multiple threats on his life in the days leading up to it, and that someone had apparently shot out a window in his home. As if this story isn't crazy enough. But part 3 actually circles back to this specific incident. So Ben says that the police response to the window damage, and the responding officers considered it more consistent with a construction worker's stray tool nearby than any kind of deliberate attack.
You guys want to come to, you can see the window and see where they were shooting from. It could be a sniper bullet on the hill.
When the police got there, they realized it was actually a construction worker who accidentally shattered the window.
Seems more likely that it happened from construction work than it happened from some random people across the way.
But even after all this, they still go online and say it was me.
He's trying to get Ben Schneider for like attempted murder. He's basically trying to set Ben Schneider up for attempted murder when meanwhile it was a nail from his own construction worker.
So what's the moral of the story here? It looks like everything bad Bricks and Minifigs is doing, they think that I'm the one that's doing the bad thing. It makes no sense.
Yeah, that's just kind of weird. And BAM's finances, as we discussed earlier in the first video, are not going that great. So Dan's own accountant earlier legal documents described BAM as something that had never come close to being profitable, and said that his sons had been pulling money from Legally Mine to keep BAM running. So I guess back to where we started, on June 9th, the public comment portion of the American Fork City Council meeting got completely taken over. You see, the meeting was originally about the city's fiscal year 2027 budget and proposed property tax increases, but instead, community members showed up to specifically demand accountability from the police department over how they handled the whole Ben situation. And then, on June 20th, there was an actual protest outside of American Fork Police Department, which drew a real crowd in front of the police department. And here, supporters showed up with handmade signs, and even Ben himself was there in a disguise, specifically a fake beard, operating under the alias Beardy McSchneider, which did make me think, wasn't this guy supposed to be in Mexico or something? Because I noticed a comment on my last video calling out that Ben didn't actually flee to Mexico, so I decided to look into that a little bit. So I guess by the time CoffeeZilla's video dropped, Ben had already been through 2 arrests in Utah, a body cam leak, a city council protest, and a restraining order keeping him from Joshua Johnson. And that's when he revealed at the end of one of his videos that he fled to Mexico, which turned out to be, from I guess what people close to the situation said, mostly just like a troll move, which makes sense for him. That's par for the course. Because apparently he had a slackline event in Mexico already planned before all this, played up the drama a bit, and then he was back in the US pretty quickly. But regardless, on May 28th, BAM filed a temporary restraining order against Ben, Brian Mansell, and a collaborator named Victor Nguyen. The TRO, which I guess is the Utah judge approved, essentially told Ben that he couldn't post anything further about the dispute. That meant part 3 of his investigation, which he says was already finished, couldn't be posted. So on June 9th, he posted a video called My Final Message, explaining the situation. Then, Bricks and Minifigs also sent a takedown request to Patreon, asking them to remove Ben's account, which thankfully was denied. But apparently the TRO is also a lot broader than just targeting Ben. The wording covers essentially anyone acting in concert with him, which is vague enough that apparently it reached the Gormans as well. And this is even though they're not defendants of Ben's case. They're actually suing BAM in a completely separate court. So on June 16th, Crystal Law Gorman and Benjamin Gorman, they filed a motion to intervene, asking the Utah court to either narrow or dissolve the TRO, specifically because it was effectively silencing their speech about their own separate legal dispute with BAM. And this is without them ever having been served or named in the case. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for June 30th, but suddenly on June 24th, all parties jointly moved to modify the TRO and remove the free speech restrictions. So the settlement converts the TRO into a preliminary injunction, but crucially, the mandatory publication takedown is gone. So defendants can now freely discuss this litigation, criticize, or report on BAM across all platforms. The remaining restrictions are specific: no doxing, no threats, no impersonation, and a 100-yard physical distance rule. So then, on June 26th, things moved again. This time, to a completely different court. Ben's attorneys filed a notice of removal, moving the entire case from Utah State Court to federal court, specifically the U.S. District Court of the District of Utah. And the argument here was the parties are citizens of different states, and the amount in dispute is over $300,000, which qualifies it for federal jurisdiction. And Brian Mansell also filed his own notice consenting to this move. So on the legal representation front, both Ben and Brian Mansell are now fully represented, which is a significant shift from last month because, you know, everyone was worried that Ben maybe was going to represent himself, because that would have been a disaster. Because the best way to lose a slam dunk case is by representing yourself. But at this point, the story is global. It's way beyond just the internet. Like the BBC decided to cover the situation even. Various law commentary channels, they've weighed in. Even a comedian named Josh Johnson. And then on top of everything, there was even a completely unrelated Lego theft ring that got busted in Arlington, Virginia between my original video and this follow-up video right now. And obviously it has nothing to do with BAM, but the comment section still had a field day with this. Regardless, now that part 3 is actually out, I think we kind of have a clearer idea of what's been going on this whole time and where things could be headed. Currently, we're looking at a very lengthy trial, I think. That's what I would guess. But then on top of the federal civil case, the Gorman separate lawsuit, and Brian Mansell still waiting on his money he's owed, Ben is still apparently sitting on a felony charge that could carry up to 15 years, and a RICO accusation, and a second, more sealed off case in American Fork that he still doesn't fully understand. So at this point, I mean, pretty much every party in the story has told their own version, and there's still no neutral account of what actually happened in the police station or in that courtroom. At this point, I don't think too many people are currently on BAM's side though, that's for sure. But what we do know is this is still very much unresolved. The federal case still has to play out. Ben's criminal charges, if they're still active, haven't been publicly dropped as far as I can tell. And finally, Ed Mansell's Star Wars collection is, as of this video, still not fully accounted for. So the story is still unfolding, and I guess we just kind of have to wait and see what happens. So hey, if you're new here, feel free to subscribe, drop a like if you enjoyed this video, and I'll absolutely cover when there's a new update. But other than that, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.